Good morning, noon, or night, wherever and whenever you are listening. You are listening to The Shift. I'm your host, Doug McKenty. This is the 26th episode of The Shift. It's being recorded on January 31st, 2018. If you like what you're listening to, please think about becoming a patron. That's patreon.com/The Shift. If you want to find out more information, join my Facebook page at The Shift with Doug McKenty. Join the conversation on Twitter at DMcKenty. And for more information and for the archives of the show, check out my website at www.theshiftnow.com. My guest on the show today is documentarian Micheal Joseph, host of the powerful, informative, and illuminating video series entitled Occult Science, available on YouTube at Schism 206. The series draws upon a variety of primary sources, including prominent intellectuals and scholars, as well as high-level Freemasons, Theosophists, and other members of the occult, to paint a picture of the hidden esoteric spirituality which begins at the dawn of human civilization and extends its influence into the present day. Micheal is able not only to describe the central tenets of this hidden religion, but he is able to identify its characteristics in many of the foundational institutions of modern-day civilizations. You will be surprised to discover how closely the worldview propagated by modern science mirrors the perspective of this secret spirituality which has its roots in mythology that is thousands of years old. Not only does an understanding of this secretive religion clarify how we got where we are today, but it will also elucidate where we are headed into the future if we allow those who adhere to this system to continue to control our spiritual evolution into the transhuman melding of spirit and matter as we enter the final stages of what they call the Great Work. Here to help simplify this very complex subject, I want to welcome Micheal Joseph to the program. Thanks for coming on the show, and thank you for helping to make the shift. How are you doing today? Yeah, this is crazy stuff. I mean, I've been spending the last week going through, you've got about 30 hours of information on YouTube. What you're describing is just the stuff that it's always been on the outskirts of what everybody's talking about when they talk about the Freemasons or the conspiracy or the occult. But nobody's, I don't think, ever really put it all into this package the way that you have on YouTube. So I just recommend it to everybody to really kind of start to figure out what really seems to be going on behind the scenes here, and getting such a beautifully painted picture of what is going on. It's just really helpful and really informative. And it is super complex, so it's nice to be able to take the time to, sit down with it and really kind of digest it and figure it out. I guess I just wanted to get started, first of all, I wanted to kind of explain a little bit about my background in all of this, because this is the first time that I've delved into it. You seem to approach it more from the side of the tarot or the astrology that you seem to know really well. It's kind of phenomenal to listen to you describe things, and the numerology angle. I've always approached things more from the more scholarly side of things. Like, I've studied philosophy, and then I've done Tai Chi, which is more, so that's where I kind of get my oriental study and my personal experience with what they call the alchemy, or the internal alchemy, which is what the occult is getting into with this occult science that you describe, really. But of course, they get into it from a slightly different point of view. But it was just interesting then to kind of get your take on it from that other place, because to me, I think the occult really blends the two. And so to get started today, actually, why don't you do that? Because you do such a great job of sourcing this material, and you use both members of the occult who have written books from the past, but also modern scholars, so you can put the two together. Can you describe these people that you've read? I can see your Blavatsky in the background there.
Oh, yeah. I don't have a huge library, but the books are long enough that you could spend a long time going through it.
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah. I can't believe you've sat down and just for fun read through a lot of this stuff. I mean, it would put a lot of people to sleep. So I really commend you for that.
Yeah. A little trick of the trade, even though it's a little more expensive, I bought the Kindle versions.
Uh-huh.
And I also have the actual versions. And unfortunately, when you source in the Kindle versions, they give you like a location, like location 3506. And it's like, well, not everyone's going to have that, so I can't really use that. But the great thing about it is you can search keywords. So if I want to know all about Apollo from Madame Blavatsky, I can look up all the places ahead of time where she talks about Apollo. But for me, I got to make sure that I read often like 3 or 4 pages before and 3 or 4 pages after, because that's the key to all of this, that which I learned is you got to try to take it in the context in which it's written if you're going to be objective about it. And it's hard to do because sometimes what you'll find them describing, they're just even writing somebody else's viewpoint that they might not even agree with. You know, this happens a lot when people quote. I noticed like a couple times people have looked into Manly Palmer Hall's Secret Teachings, and it's usually from a more biblical Christian perspective, and they're kind of looking for whatever they can find to make them look really bad, you know. Mm-hmm. And there was one time where Manly Palmer Hall was talking about black magic, and he was sourcing somebody describing it, but he wasn't. What he was describing as black magic, he wasn't promoting. He was actually condemning. But somebody took that as saying, "Look what Manly Palmer Hall is espousing here," and that's the danger of that. That's really what it is. Like, there's a lot in these books, and you really have to. It's kind of a humbling experience to a degree, because I started off spending like an hour just trying to figure out what one paragraph said, like a long paragraph, and you looking up different words. And to be perfectly honest, like, it really helped my reading comprehension. So once you kind of go through that process of really, okay, let me get 2 or 3 pages and understand what they're saying really well, it gets easier, and then the next time you go through 2 or 3 pages, it takes you half the amount of time and stuff like that. So, I haven't read through all of Isis Unveiled, their secret doctrine, but I've read through enough of it, and I just got highlight marks all over it. And I just, it started with, in the truther world, there's a whole debate on the cosmology now and the shape of the Earth. And I like listening to those things. I don't have an opinion on it really, but it's interesting. And so I was wondering, okay, well, people are claiming that maybe all that stuff is false. Are there esoteric reasons to fake what we're told in science, or bias it in any way? And I'd say it's a resounding yes, according to the philosophy, but I'm more on the line of I understand more psychological, sociological things. I'm terrible with science, observation, math, physics. So when people want to debate all that stuff about the Earth and what shape it is, they can do that. But I just find the psychological nature of the whole argument and everything very interesting, because it's really a lot of just symbolism, just the idea of like a quote unquote flat Earth or a sphere Earth. From the occultist viewpoint, those are almost like allegories for human consciousness. It's almost like a tarot card in a way, where flat thinking and square thinking, like the square in Freemasonry, is of the lower nature, 5 sense reality, and then the compass is a spherical nature of deity, or what they view as divinity. So it was just very fascinating to me, and I just found myself not really knowing exactly what to think, and that was what I wanted to do. I want to make it as objective as possible, because I don't like it when people present information and research when there's a taint to it, because I have to filter out, okay, like when somebody's an Orthodox Christian and they're going through this stuff, there's a certain lens that gets filtered through. Same thing with somebody who's really into these doctrines. They have a certain lens. And so I have to intuitively kind of see where they might have an emotional bias, because usually there's like a polarity there, where people who grew up in like maybe a ultra Christian household, they might really hate that so much that they dive all into a certain element of occultism, and things that I think that are, worth considering in the Orthodox viewpoint, they're just not even going to listen at all, because they've been traumatized by certain aspects of it. I totally get it. And on the flip side, some people are into all this occultism, maybe like New Age stuff, they'll call it, and then they have a bad experience, and then they all of a sudden, New Age is satanic, I'm an Orthodox Christian, and they won't listen, you know what I mean? And it's always polarity things, and that's what really a lot of the alchemical ideas in these books are all about, is polarity, and that's what they're really, the controllers to me are masters of, and they're very good at getting us to argue with each other and fight with each other. And really the only way to reconcile that in this alternative media world is to be objective and at least be able to see other people where they're coming from and understand when maybe they're getting a little bit emotionally worked up about something. It's not ideal, but not, if you understand that, you can approach things better. And that's what I thought when doing this research. You know what? I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions that I'm finding that I hear people argue about this and that. So I'm going to put it up on YouTube. I'm going to do something with it and share it. And hopefully that my only real goal was just to help alleviate some of the fear and the arguments that people have with a lot of this stuff by saying, hey, this is what they say. You take it how you want.
Right. Well, it's just such important information to understand from that perspective, from the perspective of the occult, because so many people do, God, you start talking about Lucifer or Satanism, especially like you talk about in the truther world, man, you can, or from the Orthodox Christian point of view, and you can, you're just going to get so much of an emotional reaction. So to really understand what these occultists are talking about, I mean, it's just not all evil. It's not so black and white. There's something more in depth going on, and I have taken some time to really think about this and digest it, because it's very, just to find out if hey, could I be a member of the occult? Can I actually participate in this kind of alchemy? I think in the end, my answer is going to be no, but it's for more complicated reasons, not because the system of knowledge is inherently evil. Although, yeah, at the end, I'd like to get into this a little bit more. Let's try to explain first some of the basics of it, because, God, it gets so complicated so quickly. If we could even just describe, take a second to describe the Freemasons and the Theosophical Society and kind of what is occultism. What does it mean to be a member of these secret societies and have this kind of secret theology that's hidden from the rest of us, if you will, and what are they trying to do, just so people kind of get a foundation of these groups without having that, that emotional attachment that so many people automatically get when they hear these terms.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've never been in a secret society, so I can't say from that side of it, but right. When you read the doctrines and then you look at the world and you apply that mindset, a picture starts to be painted. And I guess the foundation of most of my work is based on kind of these two things. One, the United Nations, which I have a lot of issues with that organization in a lot of more esoteric ways once you start seeing what's going on in the world. Maybe we can get to that later. But, they have a spiritual foundation driving it. It's called Lucis Trust. And it's pretty hidden. It's all laid out on their website, but not many people are going to go there. They don't know about it. Versus if you go to a UN website or the different districts and stuff they have, that's the more exoteric. And then the Lucis Trust is the esoteric part of it, where,
right.
How many people are going to go find that on their own? So on Lucis Trust's website, this is the spiritual foundation of the United Nations. And it's following Madame Blavatsky's teachings. And Alice Bailey is involved in this to some degree. Now, some people will complain and say that Alice Bailey is like a heretic to Blavatsky's philosophies, but I just go straight to Blavatsky's philosophies and then look at the United Nations. I'm kind of eliminating the middleman of Alice Bailey there, just because,
and Bailey started the Lucis Trust, or the Bailey family started the Lucis Trust.
Yes,
just to clarify for people.
Yeah, yeah, so there was this controversy of Lucifer Publishing Company, and then it was Lucis. I don't really care so much about that. It's all on their website, but it's talking about the age of Aquarius. It's talking about Christ's consciousness as a fact, and all of this quote unquote kind of new age stuff that, at least for somebody who's in the world and doesn't believe in any conspiracy thing and everything is just random chaos or whatever. And they think that things like astrology are just absolutely stupid, or, science has debunked it, right? And they don't have a problem with world organizations. There's no conspiracy there. And and they also usually hate religion, in its exoteric sense. So why is this organization that is involved in so many facets of the world that should be secular, right? It's world government in a sense, and philanthropy. Well, why do they have a giant spiritual ideology running it? And once you start looking into the roots of the UN and how the Rockefellers basically, they were the rock on the foundation of which it was built. They provided the real estate in New York City, and then the Rockefellers, they built statues with Prometheus and Atlas, and then the twin towers of Freemasonry, North and South pillars. There's all kinds of stuff in Blavatsky's work about, especially Prometheus. I mean, she has many chapters on it, and he's like a huge figure. But it's really philosophical and allegorical to states of consciousness, and to me, how these quote-unquote adepts, they view themselves as having this Promethean intellect indwelling in them. It's not like they worship a literal dude holding fire, stealing it. You know what I mean? None of this stuff is literal to them. It's all very psychological. And that is probably key number one, where the literalism, at least in their viewpoint, is for the exoteric, the profane. They literalize things, and they don't understand this deep psychic nature to it, I guess. And then the other foundation I have is Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma, and then Manly Palmer Hall, because he kind of takes from Pike a lot. And once you start reading these things, you'll see how they all interweave and overlap. And Albert Pike, a lot of what he takes in Morals and Dogma is from Eliphas Levi, the Baphomet guy. A lot of people probably know who he is. He's a French occultist way back in the day. So a lot of his writings, which I've looked at, that's how I knew. I would read Levi, and I would be like, oh, I thought I read that in Morals and Dogma. And then I realized that Albert Pike just took it verbatim and didn't source it. So some people say he's plagiarizing him.
Interesting.
Or maybe that's like an esoteric, like, oh, who am I quoting here? Like, you know what I mean? You never know which way they're looking at it. But the reason for Pike being so important to me is they have a statue of him in Washington, D.C. And it's funny because within the past 3 or 4 years, the whole idea about having a Confederate flag or Confederate history is like the worst thing in the world, and it's racist and awful. And he was a Confederate general, so where are all these people protesting that statue? Nobody wants to take that down. So there's so much Freemasonry and interwoven in it.
That's just it. I was going to clarify that Pike was a 33-degree Freemason who wrote this kind of foundational primary source that you use a lot to talk about this esoteric or kind of hidden knowledge within Freemasonry.
Yes. And a lot of people will try to make the claim that, well, this is a book on like anthropology and it's not really like the Freemasons book and whatnot. And that's fine, but when you start digging into it and then you start applying it to what you see in the world, well, obviously his writings must be pretty important, because you can see all this stuff he's talking about with pyramids, obelisks, flames. I get into a lot in the JFK assassination too. There's a lot of stuff going on there. All of that stuff that he's talking about, how it was laid out in Egypt and what they meant, I mean, that's pretty much our nation's capital. And then they have one of the most important Masonic lodges right in Washington, D.C. Things like Alexandria, Virginia, that's an allusion to Alexandria, Egypt, which was huge. They have a lot of history, which is built, they make it mythology when you start looking into more mainstream or university level history on like the Alexandrian Library and Hypatia and its so-called burning. They mythologize that a lot. And when I started reading, a little side tangent, so what the university level research said about that, there's a lot of people like, oh, the Great Library really wasn't so great. People kind of make it out to be this thing. Hypatia wasn't really this huge martyr for whatever it was. There's a lot more, like anything, gray area with it. But It's interesting how the Hollywood version that we get and the esoteric version in these books are exactly the same. So who's running Hollywood? They're both giving us the same version of history. So that's kind of, and then I throw in some Aleister Crowley stuff just because he's such an important figure in entertainment. And so that's like the esoteric well that I draw from, because it's there. It's obvious that these people are being revered in public, I should say in mainstream places, even though people might not know Lucius Trust. But at least that's something that everybody who thinks conspiracy is stupid, I'm sorry, that's an elephant in the room. You can't deny that. And that's got to be weird. Separation of church and state, right? So why is there all this hidden religion in government? And not to mention just something really simple is like, why does the president even meet with the Pope at all? You know what I mean? Just it's like people are just accustomed to that, but you just think about it, separation of church and state, and then you know these obelisks in St. Peter's Square and obelisk, you know what I mean? It's just like, I'm sorry, but there's something going on. And to what level you think something's going on, that's what the Occult Science series will help you figure out on your own.
Well, it's just like you're saying. I mean, the statue of Albert Pike in Washington, D.C., also, you know, the massive Freemason temple or the Freemason building in Washington, D.C. And the other thing, I looked up the Theosophical Society. If you just Google Theosophical Society, you can see in San Francisco, they've got a huge building, a huge center. Obviously, you know, millions of dollars backing both of these groups. I mean, these are major centers of knowledge to somebody, to some people. And you describe in the series, you know, who those people are through the Lucis Trust. You can go on the Lucis Trust website and be like, man, I mean, you know, there was a slide that you showed in the video series where it had the Lucis Trust working with the UN, working directly with the CERN Hadron Collider, you know, where it's like, I mean, you can just look at it and see that these organizations are all working together with this kind of occulted knowledge or this esoteric knowledge, you know, working behind the scenes. So just to clarify, because I want to get this foundation built so we can have more complicated conversation here, you know, within the next half hour. But the difference between the esoteric or the hidden or the occulted knowledge that these groups are pursuing, and then the exoteric knowledge that is what we all, you know, the rest of us see, the masses, the people that haven't studied this stuff before, who don't understand, who just get like the basic, the orthodoxy versions of these deeper, more complex subjects. Can you describe the difference between those two methodologies so that people can kind of grasp, you know, that basic dichotomy that's going on here?
Okay, well, first I can just say the standard religion on the exoteric sense, what the esoteric version of that is. So with the Abrahamic faiths, you'd have Judaism, which the esoteric version would be like Kabbalah. Mm-hmm. And then Abrahamic Christianity, the esoteric version of that would be Gnostic Christianity. Islam, Abrahamic version of that would be like Sufism or like Zoroastrian roots. And then this is where it gets a little more complex. There is an exoteric paganism or kind of pantheist idea, and that is more pagan Rome and ancient civilizations where they anthropomorphize gods. You know, it's like gods with emotions. They got angry. You got to pray to the great rain god not to give you a flood. You know, that kind of stuff. That's all exoteric and quote unquote profane to them. Anytime you give God emotions or human characteristics, that's deemed as blasphemous, which is interesting because that's very similar in Orthodox Christianity. There's actually certain areas where Orthodox Christianity and Gnostic Christianity actually synthesize and almost have the exact same viewpoint, but the characters and what they represent differ. But and then the pantheism, if you worship nature in its like sort of Saturnian devouring sense and duality, and that is exoteric. And then so there's the esoteric paganism, which is kind of like of the cosmos, which is the visible God, which is this one monad, which is all polarities mixed into one, and that's kind of like their version. And same thing with pantheism, where that spark of that God is in nature, and then that's sort of like scientific pantheism, where you're breaking things down, trying to find that spark of divinity or whatever. It's, you know, it kind of overlaps with a lot of Gnostic thought, and all the esoteric, they do these as all the same. It's just they might have a different deity name for a concept, or, you know, they allow it its sort of own individuality, but they think it's all rooting from this same source. And so this is why they revere so much like ancient Greece and like Alexandria, because that version of paganism to them was of this cosmos, and, you know, like Plato, Pythagoras, folks like that are always talked about. And then lastly, there's atheism has an esoteric version to it, as far as that's pretty much the basis of the Occult Science series.
Yeah.
And that's what really blew my mind when I got into this, where really the esoteric version of it is, to some degree, like Eastern religion. I'm not saying like I'm saying Eastern religion from their viewpoint. This gets into, you'll see with like some of the transhumanist movements at the end of the series, like the India Future Society and avatars and the Dalai Lama and this 2045 Avatar project. And then CERN, obviously, science, right? And they have the big Shiva statue, which is Eastern religion. So it's interesting because Blavatsky and most of these occult writers, they say that the Eastern traditions are the source. And that is what the pure spirit of Lucifer is. It's the spiritual doctrine of Eastern traditions that is what they view as Lucifer. So it's not like this angel flapping its wings and they think, he was misunderstood. It's not literal. And so his fall and his oppression from this quote unquote demiurge god, of this evil creator god, that is an allegory for Abrahamic religion coming into being and bastardizing or quote unquote raping. So when you have like the rape of Hypatia, from their viewpoint, she has that pure doctrine, and her getting raped is like raping the mystery religion. And again, it's strong language, but that's like the allegory. So I wonder if they mythologize some of these stories to teach their mystery religion. And so really the things that taught in science, like the Big Bang, Darwinian evolution, and cosmology, several of those things align directly with these esoteric teachings that apparently have been taught for thousands of years. And we're just happening now discovering in 1900, a Catholic priest discovers the Big Bang theory, and it just happens to mimic the primordial cosmic egg of the Kabbalistic story of creation and this infinitely expanding deity and this single point. It's just almost verbatim from the mystery books. And then everyone's, the Big Bang, evolution. And here's the key point about evolution. Blavatsky talks about it as Darwinian evolution and natural selection. Occultism agrees with that, but not that it came from the lower apes or nature. They believe that there's this root race cycle where it came down from the spirit realm, which was divine and androgynous, and it goes through this cycle into bisexual, then separation of the sexes, and then it goes back up, and eventually it's going to ascend above the original point of creation. And that is where it comes back up into like androgyny. So you wonder, with all this transgender and transhumanist stuff, is this just preparation for that based on this cycle? And she even says that the hidden hand elites know this cycle, they hide it from the profane, and they guide humanity through it. And you look at the world and it's just like you put two and two together, and it's just like, dude, this is what's going on, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, well, I mean, even in terms of the calendars, I think a lot of people are familiar with the Mayan calendar coming to an end in 2012. You talk a lot about Kali Yuga, which apparently we're at the end of Kali Yuga. The Maharishi Mahesh Yogi declared a few years before he died it was the end of the Kali Yuga. So we've got all these different calendars that actually do, from different cultures that are saying that this is the end of a grand cycle and the beginning of a new one. The end of the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius in the Western zodiac. So we're seeing this over and over again. Let's take another couple of steps back, just again to clarify, because I want to. I mean, it's just so funny. I've done a couple of interviews recently, and people are talking about this Luciferian religion that's behind all of this stuff that's going on. But a lot of people have a tendency to, I'm not saying like you, I'm not saying that I personally am into this stuff, but I just want to clarify for my listeners, what exactly is this esoteric religion that's working behind the scenes that calls itself Luciferian? Because, and another thing, the way that I've seen it, just from my own studies and then after listening to the Occult Science series, that there's a lot of blending of the mythologies. Like from an exoteric point of view, you might have an Orthodox Christian that then can't stand this pagan over here or that Muslim over there because they're different. But from the esoteric point of view, all of these things spring from the same source. they're grabbing different mythologies or different allegories from all these different sources, and they're blending them together into this one same overarching theology that drives what they're doing, that drives this great work that they're all participating in. And so when you talk about like Lucifer, but then Lucifer, I mean, I can think of all the names that you talk about. You talk about Osiris, you talk about Lucifer, you talk about Christ, you talk about Prometheus. These are all the people that are imbued with this spark of this gnosis or this Christ consciousness, that are very often in some way persecuted by those in the exoteric world that can't understand this divine spark, and so they're struggling. Prometheus gets his liver out, Osiris gets torn to pieces, Jesus gets crucified on the cross, but it's all describing this same fundamental archetype. So can you get into how they're all different, different mythologies from different traditions, but they're really describing this same aspect of the esoteric tradition and the occult?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's to a degree, because I'm pretty well versed in like Orthodox Christianity. I took a lot of time looking into that, and I see that debate going on, and it is interesting how I know in certain instances where things are being twisted on the occult side to make it that one world religion. Mm-hmm. And then there's some instances where I read in the Bible where that esoteric version makes more sense to me, and the Orthodox is trying to explain away this weird passage. But if you're initiated, it makes a lot of sense. And then there's sometimes where the esoteric's trying to make it make sense, and they're just reaching. But then in the Orthodox context, it makes sense. So this is my problem with people trying to pick one side or the other. Mm-hmm. I find a very hard time doing that when I learn to be really objective about it. And so, in essence, like Jesus Christ in Orthodox was God incarnate on earth and, performed this cosmic sacrifice for humanity, right? And that is the only version or God that ever incarnates. And then the viewpoint is that, when God comes down in like the garden, walking in the cool of the garden, or the angel of the Lord, this is all supposed to be Christ. He's like the incarnation of God on earth whenever God is on earth. And then the Father, no one's seen the Father. That's like the essence that is outside of the material realm, but it's still the creator of it. So it's kind of complex. But then the esoteric version is that there's this divine wisdom or gnosis of the true nature of our reality and the true highest form of divinity. And this is what all these initiates have. So that's what Christ had, and he was revealing that secret doctrine to the apostles. And in esoteric philosophy, the apostle Paul and John are like the most revered. So even Crowley says, like, who can argue with Paul? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it's so hilarious that Christians freak out on Crowley, but he like loves St. Paul. So, but again, they have their own understanding of some of these doctrines. And so the book of Revelation and the Gospel of John are really important in occultism. So their viewpoint is kind of like, if you have that Christ mind or mind of Christ, you have this, that gnosis that you get initiated in the societies and you understand the true nature of what everything is. And so here's kind of where it can get into darker territories. Mm-hmm. Part of the doctrine is that good and evil are just a polarity. They don't really exist. And I totally resonate with a lot of the polarity stuff in alchemy, but I don't resonate with that one. That's just my personal opinion. But you could see how if somebody didn't believe that, and the profane, quote unquote, profane people, they view it as good guys and bad guys, or good and evil. Mm-hmm. And so if they're kind of like thinking, oh, we can do whatever we want to the profane to transmute their consciousness however we see fit, then you can see that. And then you wonder with a lot of this stuff that's alleged in the truther world about weird rituals and, all that childhood pedophilia. I don't know exactly how I feel about all that. I still, some things don't add up with it to me. I think there's a lot of fear around it, but I can totally get how maybe you would initiate somebody by saying, okay, if you really believe our doctrines that good and evil doesn't exist, do something really fucking evil that somebody would think that that's evil. And that might be part of the initiation and one of the darker aspects of this.
Yeah.
But there's also an aspect of allegory, and this is when Crowley and people, talk about his like child sacrifice stuff. That's all, symbolic. And Crowley seemed like the kind of person that would like to just get a rise out of Christians. So would say stuff like that just to fuck with people. Right. Sorry if I can't. I don't know if I can swear, but
I think it's all good.
I'll keep it down to a minimum. So anyway, so like it's hard to discern that aspect of it, but you can see from the doctrine, if you don't believe, if you I think even Blavatsky, I can't remember where it was, but she talked about how like Shiva, the archetype of that, forces people to view with equal reverence their evil acts and their good acts. And I'm like, what? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It's and that's what it's like. Their version of God is all of this into one, and that's just divine. It's just being. There's no polarity, and that is divinity. I think Crowley says a devil who had a unity would be a god, essentially. So it's all about this unity, equilibrium, and stuff like that. And so you have all this one world government, merging the races, merging the sexes, merging rich and poor, allegedly, by a lot of this, universal philanthropy and stuff like that, and collectivism. You can see how a lot of that is built into that simple doctrine of equilibrium. And so that's really the foundational element to all of this, is polarity to unity. And if people look at the Mercury caduceus, that's what it is. The serpents separate or polarize. They're against each other, and then they synthesize, and then they go over and they polarize and synthesize all the way up to quote unquote perfection. That's the alchemical process. So you can see them doing that with everything. They play both sides, then they bring it together, play both sides, bring it together. And I think that that's really, and everybody in the truth of the world gets that, but how deep that goes, I think a lot of people don't see that. And so when we get polarized and we're arguing, Christians are arguing with the Gnostic people in the truther world, and then the flat earthers are arguing with the globe earthers, and people are saying, Trump is Q or whatever, and people are saying that's a huge psyop. Everyone's and I don't know. I mean, I don't know what to think about a lot of that stuff, but how we treat each other in the process of debating those things, there's a better way to do it, and then there's the screaming polarized fear version, and I think that is the occultists are like laughing at us when that happens, and right. I'm hoping that my series can help alleviate some of that.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. Like in my own interpretation of things, I've just it reminds me a little bit of my own, like my study of Nietzsche, who's probably the most occult of the Western philosophers that I've studied, where he gets into like beyond good and evil, and he talks about slave morality versus master morality. And then he talks about, well, I mean, he mentioned Zoroaster, which Zoroastrianism, I think, my interpretation started in Iran or Persia. It's probably the beginning of all of this. And then it kind of went into the Hinduism that you talk about with Shiva and Vishnu and all of those guys. And then it kind of split, and some of it went into China, which is Taoist, and then and then it went into the Middle East, which became the Abrahamic religions, and then the Western occultists. But so Nietzsche kind of gets into all of that, but he, there's something about this unifying good and evil that makes me think that you can get away with being an asshole, that I just don't like. I don't like that part of it, that you can kind of get off, and I see it sometimes. This is what I don't like about it. I see it in that these occultists or these, and I mean, there's a reason why you call them the elites, I guess. They think that they're smarter than everybody else, and so they can have control. And I guess I'll go ahead and bring this up now, because I do some comparison and contrast between the quote unquote civilized world, which I think this occult philosophy seems to be working behind the scenes to drive whatever we call civilization. This is certainly what they talk about with the great work, is to somehow cultivate the most divine or the maximally civilized human being. And then you talked about how Madame Blavatsky would often put down the indigenous people, as barbarians. Well, these people are just barbarians. They had no idea they didn't have this spark of divinity.
Savages.
Yeah. And that's
And, you know,
why,
people argue that that was a common term, which I get, but just read what she's saying, and it's, you know, it's weird.
yeah, no, I mean, I think that this is a fundamental difference that I do have with this whole idea, because I mean, I get it. Like, even in indigenous cultures, there was the shaman. You know, there were the people that had the occulted knowledge, if you will, that were responsible for the culture of the tribe. But the difference is that the shaman typically were very humble people. You know, they didn't have this arrogance. They weren't trying to take control of the tribe. They were just trying to help people out, you know, with the knowledge that they had. So I don't know. It gets really down to the intention behind the action for me, which is, it seems when this esoteric philosophy and these occult groups, you know, when their intention is to control civilization, to create a more divine man or being, even at the expense of the profane, you know, it's like, wait a minute, that arrogance is kind of it's a tip off for me. It makes me think, yeah, this is what I don't like about it. Even if on the surface the philosophy kind of makes sense, like you're saying, the alchemy, separating, you know, and then synthesizing, and then separating and synthesizing, and this is how we refine our spiritual essence over time. You know, that makes sense, but I think you can do it in a good way, and you can also do it in a bad way, you know?
I think what you said there with the arrogance thing, I think that's the key. And this is what I find so interesting, because, you know, again, I'm not an apologist for Orthodox religion, but I do see value in aspects of it. And I really like their version of Lucifer, and Lucifer and Satan are one, whereas in the occultism, it's kind of more complex. I don't want to get into that because it's a whole tangent, but it's about being prideful over your creator and thinking that you should be in charge, you should be the boss. And to me, it's like the ultimate projection when you feel self-entitled, and then you start slandering your creator, making him look real bad, and then you prop yourself up as the good guy. And that's all I see these elites doing, is everything that they do, they create, they like, you know, they blame the wars on the profane, but they're the ones that orchestrated them, and then they swoop in and they're the good guys, and all of a sudden, like, that's enlightening, and it's just like you playing both, like, that's cheating, that's deception, that's awful. You have to do that to make yourself look like the good guy.
Right. I had the same feeling when I was listening to your series, that, like, wait a minute though, like, you're pretending like you're the good guy, but you're the one that's orchestrating all this crap, and then you're making fun. Why don't you just teach why do you give us this crap in public school and then make fun of us for being the profane, when you could be teaching us sacred geometry, you know, and you could be teaching us Greek mythology or whatever, you know. So it is. It's they're playing two sides of something here, and it's not. And then they're making themselves. It's almost like they're creating the system where they're allowed to be arrogant and elitist and snobbish, when it's just like, come on, you know.
But it's disguised as philanthropy. They're enlightening all of us. You know, and that's what Prometheus is. And the other component to, like, the Lucifer viewpoint from the Orthodox side is that this is what I do. I like to take that Orthodox story, but view it like the occultists do, as an allegory for consciousness and awareness, and not make it all literal. And I think that that's the nice alchemy of your own. You can kind of weave those things together, because, you know, in the story, in the Orthodox viewpoint, Lucifer is the most beautiful, intelligent, created being, entity, whatever you want to call it, and was supposed to be exalting God. You know, it was like the seal of perfection, they called it. And so, to me, this is what happens when the seal of perfection, that is ultimately, like, superiorly intelligent, gets an ego. And how clever are they, and how they worship themselves? You know what I mean? And so in science, everything there is sort of exalting their version of creation, their spiritual essence. And in that version of Kabbalah, the Ein Sof, that's like the spiritual essence of Lucifer, that's not even the creator. That's just the spirit that goes through the creation. So the creator is secondary on the hierarchy, but you have to kind of discern what they're saying. So they're kind of reversing a story here, whereas at least in Orthodox Christianity, the Most High is the creator as well, you know? And that's sort of what I believe, but I don't believe that entire version of it. That's my problem with like a lot of the Orthodox stuff, you know, like all the messed up stuff in the Old Testament. Like I know people explain that away with Nephilim and whatever, but I'm just like, dude. And there are instances where a lot of that stuff gets taken out of context. But the fundamental issue to me is that I think that the exoteric religion, there's certain elements of it that are dangerous to these New World Order occultists, and they do the alchemy. They intentionally poison that, bring it to the Negredo, and try to make all of that look crazy and stupid. And then they give you the solution. Oh, we have this one world religion where everyone get along. And I agree, and to an extent that, hey, I don't care if people grew up Hindu or whatever. I care more about what actually binds us as people and how we treat each other. And all those things transcend, I think, religion and you know, racial groups and whatever. But they get us so focused on that so that their version of that oneness, which is driven by arrogance, like you said, like at the core, that's why it's so, like, you read these doctrines and you're like, it's still inspiring in certain instances, or like, wow, that's a really profound statement. Like, there's a lot of very interesting stuff in there, but to me, you're getting a mirrored version of it. It's like secrets of creation and science and whatnot, but it's all for the wrong reasons. And so that's why, like, with the Gnostic aspect of it, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with, like, looking into the secrets of nature and trying to figure out what's hidden and stuff like that. But it seems like they're only doing that for a means to an end of, like, transhumanism. Whereas, you know, the average person, they're just trying to be a better person. You know what I mean? Like, I don't feel like I'm God and I'm just trapped in some body and I don't deserve to be and blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Maybe I do deserve to be. Maybe I screwed up. Maybe I got duped by, you know, that's kind of my own philosophy on it. Is like, part of me thinks that maybe the karma or our lessons here, to blend it with the Eastern idea, is that maybe we were duped by this created essence that wanted to be the Most High, and we're in an opportunity where we can spiritually evolve by seeing what happens when that runs the world. And that's why when people say Satan is the god of this world, you know, I can understand that viewpoint. I don't think it's so in a scary way, but it's just sort of like we have an opportunity, a unique opportunity, to see what we were kind of duped by and really be like, you know, do I really want to be a part of this? And I think that's why you can withdraw from the system and still be content. You know, you don't have to be miserable. And that's
Right.
what I really want to promote on my channel moving forward, is how to use a lot of this stuff in ways that I think are just practical, down to earth, and without a ton of ego like they seem to employ it.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you from my experience, I talked a little bit off camera before the interview about my experience with Tai Chi and the Eastern alchemy, or the Taoist alchemy, and the function of that is just like you're saying. You just want to be a better person. You don't want to control other people. I mean, even in the martial arts aspect of it, it's about self-defense, creating boundaries for yourself. But it's mostly about, you know, being a person who utilizes this kind of alchemy to refine your spirit so that you're more in balance and you can function better in the world and have, you know, and protect yourself, be a more powerful individual that can't get, you know, a higher level of awareness. We actually call, like, the internal energy, or the chi can be called awareness energy. It's like just learning how to expand your consciousness, but it's just to benefit yourself, you know, to make you a more functional person. And hopefully you can maybe benefit the people around you as well, you know.
Exactly.
But there's none of this, like, the need for control or thinking of, like, I'm at the top of the pyramid, you know. And there's also none of the occulting of the knowledge. I find the very fact that they want to hide this knowledge, like, I mean, in Tai Chi, you're the first one to say, I mean, my teacher will tell you, and his teacher told him that, like, you know, maybe a handful of your students is really going to be able to get it to the higher levels. I mean, it's not, you know, but at the same time, the whole system is a package for, you know, an 85-year-old can start to do it just for their arthritis. Mm-hmm. Or a 25-year-old can start to do it and become a super wizard. Or, I mean, for that matter, an 85-year-old could become a super wizard. You never know. But I mean, it has it all in it, and everyone is welcome to participate, you know, and it's not hidden, even though, I get it. It's like I was saying about the shaman. Only a few people are the ones that, I don't know. Over the course of my life, because, as a younger philosophy student, I kind of got into the arrogance that I read in Nietzsche. But as I got older, you're just like, some people like to build houses and some people like to read philosophy. Like, one is not better than the other. Everyone just has a job to do, that they like to do. It's, And so there's just a whole different perspective that can be applied to even to this kind of esoteric knowledge or this internal alchemy or whatever it is that doesn't have to include, I'm trying to become God, like where does that come from?
Yeah, and the ironic thing is there's a whole lot of like writings in some of these doctrines it's like they're trying to project humility, but at the same time, there's another instance where it doesn't come out that at all. If anything, they're the ones that are dualistic in a lot of instances.
Right.
And it's like what you were talking about, the whole hiding secrets and stuff like that. I mean, it is interesting how people in the truther world, I always use that in quotes because I don't really, it seems like it's a lot of distortion going on there.
Yeah.
But, in that sense, we're in our own secret society on some level, and we have to hide secrets, but for a better reason. And I'll give an example. If I'm talking to somebody in everyday life, I have to sense, like, if somebody brings up some shooting that I think is suspect, or they're really into some political ideology that I think is suspect, I can't, I'm not, like, sometimes I think we can get a little arrogant and try to just bombard them with all this information, like, well, do you know this and that and that and that and blah, 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 blah. And it's not really helping them. You have to understand where they're at.
Sure.
And so you need to intentionally hide things from them, but for their benefit, and try to find the common ground that will help them see certain issues. So, like, for example, if I talk to people, and I know they're not going to, if I mention any conspiracy stuff, like, 9/11 may not have been Muslim terrorists, they're going to freak out. Right. But I can at least talk about the media with them and be like, hey, you know what? The reason I don't watch television anymore is because it just made me afraid all the time. Everything that they put on there is there, it just scares you. Like, there's no good news. Like, everything is just fear, 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 fear. Yeah. And the reason why I don't watch it anymore is because when I stopped watching it, a lot of that went away. And so I don't care about the news for that reason. There's no conspiracy there. I just see a lot of fear. I stay away from it. I feel better in my everyday life. And I say, hey, when has it ever benefited me to know when maybe there's an asteroid coming to take us out, or maybe there will be a nuclear war, or, some person got, some lady got raped and stabbed? Like, when has it ever benefited me to know that, like, that happened 100 miles away, other than just like, oh my God, the world's a scary place? And it's just like, if those things happen, it's awful. But what do you have to just live your life. And so I don't talk about 9/11 with them or some secret thing or esoteric stuff. But those are things that are fundamental to the issue. I know that those are the forces driving that media that wants to create that fear. So I'm withholding some of the secrets, but it's for a good reason, because that's not going to help the conversation. But maybe that will help them be like, you know what? Maybe Mike was right. Maybe I just, when I watch the news, it's just a bunch of, like, let me step away from it. Let me try to not do it for a couple weeks and see how I feel. Maybe I'll try what he says. And maybe that might lead them down a better path than rather than, like, I start talking about 9/11, they're like, no, stop. No, how can you suggest? You know what I mean? Right. And they'll never look at you the same way again. So you have to, in some way, you kind of parallel a lot of this secret society stuff, but you're trying to do it in a more productive way rather than like, oh, I know so much and let me tell you how it is,
Yeah. No, it's interesting. It's fascinating to think about that there are these parallels, and I don't know, it's funny. It does it reminds me of, like, again, going back to my experience with Tai Chi, like, it's an internal martial art. It looks like you're throwing a punch. I can't really describe. I mean, I even understand what they talk about when they say that only adepts, like, once you internalize the knowledge, it's more, it's not just something that you think in your brain. Like, it has to do with the way the energy is flowing through your body. And
Hmm.
so it does take, whether it's you're involved in a magical ceremony or something like that, which is the way a lot of indigenous people do it, or maybe what what these secret societies do when they induct people into their society or whatever. They put them through some kind of a induction ceremony or ritual that can alter their internal energies maybe in some way with the symbolism and the numerology and everything else that they're using. I mean, it is almost like the same system. I almost think that the only difference is the intention behind it. If you're in what Native Americans call being in a good way, if you're trying to be a good person, then it changes things. You don't want to
Hmm.
be in control. You want to let other people be free. You're not trying to be in control. I think that's a huge difference there. Even though externally or in the exoteric realm, maybe it doesn't look that different. You can't see, on that surface level or just on the materialistic level what's going on. You have to get a little bit deeper.
And sometimes I just wonder, like, with somebody who's like, like a soccer mom raising her kids, like, sometimes I think, like, what she's doing, even if she believes that 9/11 was Muslim terrorists or whatever, maybe a lot of what she's doing is actually just better for our society than some of what truther people are out there doing, which they're like picking fights with people. They're
Sure.
making all these slander videos. And here's the interesting thing. When we talked about, like, the story of Lucifer, and the Satan is in just a title or a term means a couple things. It's like the adversary, whether it's of humanity or God. Some people will debate that because people say, like, Satan works for God and, like, Job and stuff. That's a whole other thing. But there's also this component of being a slanderer or an accuser. And to me, those are the tactics. Because when somebody is, being a little bit too truthful, all the slander will come. And that's, like, the number one thing to go after them. And, this happens a lot in the alternative media community because, if somebody says something that, like, they said something that has been debunked, all of a sudden they're a shill, and then somebody's digging into all of their social media to try to find weird things that, like, look, they forgot the date of their mother's death, or they forgot, like, this or that, and I found it on, and it's just like a couple days, you know what I mean? It's just like,
Yeah, yeah.
they're a shill, they're a CIA operative, and they make this hippies video that's just like, it's one thing if something's weird, but, like, everybody's got weird lives and quirky stuff, and
Yeah,
I
right.
can't remember certain things. But what they say is, like, this is 100% proof they're a shill, and I'm just like, oh my god, but it's all slander. So ironically, and a lot of this does come from the Christian community when it's at its worst, and it's so ironic to me that Satan is the slanderer and accuser, and that's all that they're freaking doing to other people when they're in that mode of, like, you're satanic, whatever. And that's what really disillusioned me from a lot of those mindsets when there's an agenda there. I think that it's like when you think, and it's similar to, like, people who are crazy in the social justice warrior stuff. It's like their rebellion and their humanitarian ideas turn them into a monster.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what is going on here? And to me, that is satanic or Luciferian to me. It's you're proud of your own, goodwill, your own, that's what the United Nations and Prometheus is, the universal philanthropy. It's all about, we're helping. Well, are you really? And it turns this victim culture, and that's what really drives me nuts. And that's why I like when people are, like, into some sort of martial art or discipline. It's about, you're trying to better yourself and give yourself a sense of pride in a real way, or confidence, and self-empowerment in a way that's real versus, oh, I feel empowered because I can yell at a bunch of people because, they didn't support my, cause on Facebook, or my, I donated money to the Red Cross. What did you do? You know what I mean? All this, like, I did something good and blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
And I think that there's a movie that really sums this up really well. Have you ever seen The Devil's Advocate?
Uh-uh.
It's a Keanu Reeves movie, and at the end of it, basically, like, Al Pacino plays Satan, and he takes him in, and he's, like, teaching him all these deceptive things. And at the very end, Keanu Reeves is a lawyer, and the reason he got sent to Al Pacino is because he defended a pedophile, and he won the case. So some weird spiritual stuff happens, and all of a sudden he's back at the beginning at the case, and he decides to not defend the pedophile and just walk out. And everyone's like, "Oh my God, a lawyer with a conscience!"
Yeah.
And this is the best part of it. At the end, a reporter comes up to him. He's like, "Hey, can I do an interview with tomorrow?" And he's like, I don't think so." He's like, "No, but you're a lawyer with a conscience. That's a big story. Like, this is amazing." And then Keanu Reeves like, "Okay, you know what? Call me." And then he turns into Al Pacino, and he's like, "Vanity, my favorite sin," because his vanity was, "I'm such a hero now." He's using his goodness against him in that sense. And I think that is a really key fundamental issue to a lot of things that go on, not just in the truth world, but just in life. When people want to be self-righteous and exalt their good deeds to put somebody else down, rather than just doing the good deeds and not worrying about it, to me, that's being spiritual, because you're worried more about what God or the divine thinks about your good deed than trying to get noticed for it. And that's teachings in the New Testament with Jesus and the Pharisees, saying the Pharisees, they say a lot of righteous things, but they don't do it themselves. They pray in front of public. They want people to look at them and think they're righteous, but they're not. And if you're going to do good for people, do it in secret, so the quote-unquote Most High sees you doing that, versus you don't need to be noticed. Don't make a big Facebook post about how you donated a sandwich to a homeless guy. Just give him the sandwich and let it be. And that, I think that those kind of teachings are self-empowering and help you be a better person in a way that's really effective, versus like this fake, I am standing up for whatever cause because I have an ego.
Yeah, totally. I mean, maybe that's the difference between this idea of the exoteric, which tends to just keep it on the face value, and then the esoteric, which theoretically is supposed to help you actually become a better person. One of the things that popped into my mind when you were talking about like how even in this truther movement or the conspiracy world, like why we may have to feel like having to occult our knowledge or hide our knowledge. Sometimes we have to do it just to protect ourselves. I was talking with a psychologist a few weeks ago who, like, her license is going up, to the board because she's helping these people, who've suffered from satanic ritual abuse, and she's like advocating for them, even though, according to the American Psychological Association, they're just, they're suffering from false memory syndrome or whatever it is. But I mean, and I had a similar experience. I used to work with my local radio station, and now, I'm on the internet because the NPR, faction just, I mean, I was even just advocating for freedom of speech. Frankly, I wasn't going that far out. I wasn't talking about this, it's more fun doing my show on the internet now because I don't even have to worry about it. But, there is that level of society, that just won't even let you talk about it. I mean, and it's, I live in a really liberal part of the United States, and still, at our local little radio station, like, there was this, like, wow. I mean, it's like you're talking about when you approach someone, you almost have to feel them out and decide, how you're going to be able to talk about some of this stuff with, because they might just call you, completely crazy and blow you off, if you don't hide some of this knowledge or whatever, and only talk about it in the right circles. So it's just kind of interesting to me to do this comparison and contrast. One of the things that I'm trying to do with this show, and one of the things that I've started to understand after, now doing 26 interviews and continuing to try to figure out, I'm trying to figure out what is this thing called conspiracy theory, or what is the truther movement? It's like, and I have come to the conclusion that it's a different, like, it's a spiritual path. It's a different path that for some reason some people choose to go down, and other people just can't see it. They're following a different path, whether you call it exoteric, or I think maybe in some way there's this paradigm that is controlled by, I think, in the background, these secret societies who have this kind of foundational esoteric religion that they're following, and then they're creating this civilization in a certain way, and most people seem to be engaging with it on some level, whether they understand it on the esoteric level and they're a part of creating it, or whether they're just participating on the exoteric level and they're kind of a member of the profane class, and maybe they're just one of the debt slaves, paying off the Federal Reserve or whatever. and working 9 to 5 and thinking they're living the American dream. But it's just kind of fascinating to try to get into it on this deeper level of psychology. Like, what is it that we're really looking into? Why can some people look up at the sky and go, my God, look at all those chemtrails, and other people look up there and go, you're just crazy. Why are you talking? You can't talk about that. I mean, I had a guy talk about it at the local radio station. We have to keep those people who believe in these chemtrails off the air because they're crazy people. And it's like, dude, look at the sky, it's right in front of your face. Like,
yeah. And, the issue with chemtrails is, like, for me, just the fundamental point is I look up and I'm like, that's not right. Something's wrong about that. I don't know what it is. People will say, like, they're putting chemicals, they want to kill you. They say they want to block out the sun. They say they want to modify climate. I don't know what it is, but it's not right,
Right.
And I think when people get a little bit too definitive about the conclusions without, being, studying what are the actual, like, element samples that they get from air and stuff, unless you're, like, really getting in depth with, like, the scientific aspects of it, I think it's better to reserve your conclusions rather than be like, look, as chemtrails are trying to kill us all. Like, that's going to make people look at you like you're batshit crazy, rather than be like, yeah, you look at, like, what, like, why? Like, I don't remember this happening. Like, just ask about it. And usually, like, the people won't be, like, telling you to shut up. They'll just be, like, quiet and, like, that's what I've noticed. When you ask the questions and you don't give the answer, like, that's when people are more responsive, and that's when you're going to know. And either they're going to, oh yeah, what, they might ask a question, they might engage with you, or they're going to get quiet and be like, can we talk about something else?
Yeah,
and that's
right.
how you know that, like, okay, I didn't need to get in a fight. I didn't need to get into this heated discussion. I allowed them the choice of being like, let's move on, or, okay, let's talk about this. And that, like you were talking about, like, what is the conspiracy theory movement or the truth movement? What is this? And
right.
I don't know.
I know, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because we're all united on something, that we know something's wrong, and what we're being told in the media and in a lot of instances, just general society and culture, there's something inherently wrong about it. And the big debate is what that is. And what's interesting is, if I live in Boston, and so if I go out there and I'm like, yeah, you see the Red Sox game or blah, 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 like, you're comfortable, someone's going to be like, yeah, like, that, they blew it or whatever. Or, like,
right.
Like, oh, the weather and all these topical things. And then, if there's, like, a political leaning in a certain community, you can talk about that. It's safe. These are, like, responses you'll get that are you're all in agreement, whereas in the truther world, we're all in agreement on one thing: something's wrong, but what that something is and how to fix it just creates this whole cluster. It's just
right.
It's crazy. And so this is what's very interesting, I think, is because you're quote unquote waking up to a certain amount of individuality. You're like, I'm strong enough to say something's not right about this, even though the entire world's telling me it's this way. The 1984 kind of thing, But this is why I think it's so fascinating. People are still dealing with all kinds of indoctrination, even when they go into there. So some people can't shake certain religious elements of it. Some people still can't shake certain political elements of it.
Yeah.
Some people can't shake that. It's just like, oh, is this death real, or is this shooting a hoax? Is it a false flag? Do people really die? Like, all of these things are just, it's crazy. It's a crazy world, because now there's free thought, but then there's also still programming in there, and it creates this strange beast of all these different things,
It's really true. I've been finding in my political conversations lately, because this is just me. I'm like you. I don't really know what's going on, but from my perspective, I really think this whole Russia thing, like this new McCarthyism, it drives me crazy that everybody just wants to say, oh, the Russians did it. And I think, and this is just you reminded me of this, but I think a lot of people still cling to that old anti-Soviet propaganda that was around for 50 years, the Cold War stuff, and they just want to hate the Russians. And so the media just has to look at the Russians. The Russians did it, and everybody wants to cling to that. And even I know a lot of people that otherwise I would think are really intelligent people that really want to hate Russia right now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I just want to be like, I don't know. You know, maybe the Russians did, you know, flood Facebook with some pro-Trump stuff, but I'm pretty worried about the, you know, the voting machines and how they can be so easily hacked by anybody. You know, why don't we fix the voting machines first and worry about Facebook bots, you know, from the Russians farther down the line if we really care about our democracy? It just frustrates me, and I totally see what you're talking about, and I don't know what your perspective is about that, but it's just I do see that people have, you know, different elements of indoctrination that are more difficult for them to let go of as we try to walk down this path towards awakening to something, whatever it is, this something that's wrong. And we're probably about an hour into it, maybe try to talk for another 30 minutes or so.
Yeah, however long you want.
Okay. Yeah, this is really interesting. I want to try to tie it back in, this idea that something is wrong, and this is kind of the conclusion, to tie it back into occult science, when you get into the transhumanist stuff. I think that, I mean, for me personally, you know, I have, and maybe I'm just more naturalistic, or maybe I'm pantheistic, I don't know what it is, how you would describe it, but I have a belief that, you know, organic world is a beautiful thing. And I mean, I kind of, you know, I heard you in another interview talking about Star Wars and how Star Wars would actually be the dualistic, like the two different sides of the force is this dualism that wouldn't be considered esoteric.
Yeah.
The unity
but apparently now they're like balancing the force and stuff. I don't watch those, but like I kind of, I just there were some people. It was more like Christian people that were saying like it's they were kind of claiming that Star Wars was promoting duality and worshiping duality, and I think that it's not. That's more like an exoteric explanation of it, and you know, but that's the people see good and evil, right? And that's the polarity. Right. But then, like, you know, some people, like I said, I don't watch the Star Wars. I've never been like infatuated with it, but I've heard like a guy I've had on, Isaac Weishaupt. He's like all about analyzing it esoterically, and he's talking about like now it's all about balancing the force. And he's like, well, when you balance the force, you're not like making things good. You're bringing evil in to counterbalance it. And it's just sort of like, that's really more of the esoteric stuff, balance, you know, this equilibrium, right? And so what we were kind of talking about with the transhumanism, that's the equilibrium of man and machine and spirit and matter, which is parallel to a lot of what, you know, was written in these doctrines. And one quick thing I just want to mention is that there's nowhere in the Secret Doctrine or Isis Unveiled where Blavatsky says this is the goal of occultists, is to make man merge with technology and become immortal in an avatar. Mm-hmm. There's nowhere it says that's the plan, but based on the doctrines and the philosophies, you can absolutely see how they're easily applied to transhumanism, and the way they talk about these things, like the 2045 Avatar Project. They talk about once they get to a certain level, everything from there is about spiritual evolution, and it's just like, okay, you know what I mean? It's just like now all of a sudden everything's spiritual. And even I noticed this when I was younger, because I used to be into, you know, I grew up in the 90s. I was like a grunge person. I liked a lot of the hard rock bands, and you know, I became a musician. And I remember, like, you know, the bands were the bands, and then all of a sudden there was like this weird shift where certain bands started talking about, oh, we got to look at things spiritually. You got to look at everything spiritually. I remember even like System of a Down, they were saying, I think we need a spiritual perspective on the world. I'm like, where did this come from? And I'm just wondering, is there something going on greater than the quote unquote Illuminati influence that we're seeing? Something, the veil is being lifted, whether they like it or not, or we like it or not. Mm-hmm. That's the grand debate in this whole world. How much are they in control of? You know what I mean? And totally. And that's a really tricky thing, because there's some people who say you can't trust anything in politics. Don't ever support any politician. That's all controlled. Everything that they do, every number that they put in there is completely controlled. And to me, that's a bit far-fetched. I think that they absolutely try to influence politics, and I'm sure they have key figures in there. But I bet you anything, there's probably some high-up politicians, not like super high, but like they might be completely in the dark with a lot of these things. Mm-hmm. I remember watching there was something about back in the 80s, I think the Kuwait incubator hoax or something. And there was this politician that he seemed totally blindsided that the girl who testified and said all this horrible stuff happened to her was like the ambassador's daughter or something. And basically
Yeah.
just, it was found out it was a sham. And he was just like, I had no idea that she was related to him, and that would have changed everything. And this guy was like, you know, a major politician. So that just tells me there's people in politics that aren't in on it. Like, you see this face, like he was just like, whoa, that was a scary moment, you know? And so
Yeah.
I feel like people need to decide on politics, you know, if they feel like it's the right thing to do, if they feel like getting involved or on a lower level in whatever is important, like people in the truther world who still want to engage in politics and be active with that, I don't have a problem with that. Some people will go off on it. I don't know what the solution is with politics. I don't know where the line draws with it. And so people just need to do what they got to do, but you need to come from a place of personal identity and self-empowerment wherever you do anything, you know? And that's my problem, is when like people just think that if anybody, you know, voted for a certain president and they're in the truther world, they're just like a shill. It's just like, dude, it's not that, it's way more complex than that, you know? And that's, with all this stuff going on, one thing I do see personally, just to wrap this up, my point up, I mean, in conjunction with the occult science, there's almost like an internal battle of what I call elite societies. And some people say that, you know, since a lot of their doctrine is playing polarities, yes, it totally could be going on with like, you know, Trump and Clinton or all that kind of stuff, or Trump and Putin, and then like, you know, the whole Pope Francis, like, you know, Trump is like at odds with all these different people and stuff. And it is interesting because like there's some memes of like comparing him to like Trump-Aristotle, and like, you know, Aristotle seems to be somebody in because like if you watched, I did a video on this with like Carl Sagan's Cosmos, where Sagan deliberately tries to make Aristotle look bad and racist, and prop up Eratosthenes as being like this multicultural hero. And you can see the programming from way back when, and it all relates to this Alexandrian stuff. But when I actually read through some of Aristotle's viewpoints on slavery, I'm like, dude, based on the context of the time, like it's like he wanted people to be able to live their own lives and be good citizens. But if people were too uneducated and dumb to even grow their own food, they're going to die, then it's moral to enslave them. And you know what I mean? It's like, if you just think about the context of the time, like what he was writing, at least as far as I understood it, I'm like, doesn't sound that bad to me. In fact, that just sounds normal, you know, versus like, right, oh, everybody's one and equal and we can all be the superstar in the basketball team, you know? And that's why I think that there's kind of two factions, at least this is where I'm at now. I think there's more of like this Ayn Rand faction, you know, the individual, and then there's the collectivist United Nations faction going on. Now,
amongst the elites.
Yeah, I think there's even like a diversion there.
Right.
Now, you could tell me that they're both on the same side and they're just creating all this polarity. Maybe not. Or maybe there's some even higher force and control that is asserting itself. And, you know, it's really bizarre and crazy to think about. So I don't really dismiss like the political stuff completely outright, but I'm not going to get overly invested in something because I've been burnt way too many times. And, you know, when I was younger, before I knew any of this stuff, like you know, I remember when Obama came on the scene and, you know, we had all that time with George Bush and it was just like, oh, this guy's awesome. And then it's the same old crap, invading Libya and all this stuff goes on. And, you know, it's just like, well, you know, I'm not going to be fooled again. I don't mind supporting ideals that I feel maybe into political discourse, but it's only the ideal I'm supporting. The people who are in there actually have to do that. It's like the Pharisees. You actually have to do what you say about it. And so I'm not overly invested thinking like some politician's going to do what they say, but I can at least agree with certain concepts or solutions on particular issues. That's where I'm at with it.
Yeah, when I actually kind of got into this because I got into politics. Politics and economics was probably, I always talk about, you know, the different rabbit holes. It's almost like whatever your interest is, then you go down that rabbit hole if you're more of an independent thinker, and then you suddenly your world awakens to this whole other thing that's going on. And for me, I started in politics and economics primarily before I finally was like, I mean, you know, I was like, wait a minute, where does my dollar bill come from? Like after whatever, I mean, I probably got into it when I was 15, and then when I was 25, I was like, I've done all this studying about economics, and I don't know where the money in my pocket comes from. You know?
Yeah.
And that's
yeah.
when I was like, why? How can I not know, you know, the most basic fundamental thing that I use every day, this tool that I use about economics, and I've studied it for all these years. And that was kind of a big awakening for me. But I've gotten to the point
Magic.
now. Yeah, right? I've gotten to the point where I advocate two things politically. One is this community rights. Basically do everything you can to get your local government to be as strong and stand up to the rest of the BS as much as possible. Because at least in your community, you know, you can talk to your neighbors and you can make a change in your life. You know, you're raising your kids in that community. I mean, this is where it's all at. So the more independent we can be locally, the better. And then the other thing that I really try to do, and this is talk about conditioning, the left-right paradigm, man, has got everybody just so snookered, so like, oh, you know, I'm a Democrat, so I hate Trump. Oh, I'm a Republican, so I hate Obama. Like they just can't, no matter how far down the rabbit hole they go, they still, you know, have this vestige of this something that wants to hate the other team and root for their team. I mean, God, it's so deep inside of everybody. And you go into like the left and the right pillars of Freemasonry when you're talking about the left-right paradigm in politics. I mean, this is like, I just feel like it's a trap that they just set. And then we're all just arguing amongst ourselves and handing our power away to these elites because, I mean, my God, I mean, the Obama thing was classic. Like what a sell. You know, they sold us this first black president guy and it was just incredible and everything was going to be different. And then there's a direct line between George Bush, what George Bush was doing, and then what Obama did. He just kept it going. The same old game with the same people from the Council on Foreign Relations. And
it's ironic that everyone was so excited about him being the first black president and he completely screwed over the nation, or the continent of Africa with the whole Gaddafi thing.
Right.
The African American people were the most oppressed by his regime.
Yeah.
You know, like they were trying to get the gold standard, get away from the petrodollar. Gaddafi was trying to improve and unite Africa, you know, uniting the African people. And the Obama administration, again, I don't blame him. It's just whatever the hidden hand is that's doing all that.
Yeah.
Completely dismantled everything. And then there's a whole immigration crisis happened from that. And then the UN is directly involved in that. They sanctioned all these countries. There are all these evil dictators, right? And you know, the United Nations now is like this hero for dispersing the immigrants in their philanthropy when they created that problem. You know, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's unbelievable the problems that they are causing, and I don't know where to go with it. It's frustrating. Anyway, I would like to try to wrap this all back around into the occult science situation. Like, so, you know, what is the role of this esoteric? I mean, I guess, you know, where can we go to kind of wrap this up or bring it all together, everything that we've been talking about, and bring it back into, you know, what you were talking about. I think something that I wanted to get into is, I guess what would be nice to have a conversation about kind of in conclusion here, the last 15 minutes or so, is whether, like, how do they construct the reality? You touched on it a little bit, like how much control do they have? Are they creating the allegory, or is this esoteric knowledge? Like, I mean, we didn't really talk about it too much in this conversation. We could have gone deeper into the more specifics, but if people would watch some of your occult science videos, or like you talked a little bit about the JFK videos, I mean, it's just unbelievable the stuff that you can get into. When I hear you talking about some of this stuff, it's like the numerology, the astrology, the kind of the tarot mythology, that all comes together into an event, and you analyze, like you'll analyze 9/11, or the analysis of the Apollo mission was like mind-blowing, that it can all come together so that there's a mythological allegory occurring at the same time as this. I mean, so it's debatable whether we really went to the moon or not or whatever, but we're not having that debate. But this is the reality that, in a sense, like, are they constructing the reality? Is it all a Hollywood movie,
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe they just use the esoteric knowledge because maybe reality is, this is another thing, an idea that I had. I wonder what you think about this, is that maybe reality is constructed, like the holodeck, and that there is like a computer program that is behind all of this, and all things are connected in some way. And what this esoteric knowledge does, what the astrology does, or the tarot mythology does, is allows you to tap into the algorithm behind the reality, so that then you can at least utilize it a little bit to your advantage,
Mm-hmm.
So what is that connection there?
Well, this is kind of the way I view it. I kind of view like Kabbalah and all of these systems of, divisions of the zodiac and planets and all these different archetypes and whatnot. I kind of view it as reflections of trying to identify the way everything works here. And what is the reason that they're, the controllers, whenever they're in control of whatever they're doing, what are they actually trying to do and why? And I think about the idea that, again, everything in their doctrine seemed to completely hate the idea of a personal creator God. And, it's all impersonal to them. And then I look at like the technology, right? The Promethean gift of technology.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the technology we get, I think, is sort of created with an alternative agenda, and that is our test. We have to look at it and be like, you know what? There are blessings here, but we can't fall into their trap of why they created it for us. So, for example, with the internet, it's one of those things where I can learn so many different things on my own, mostly for free with it. But how many people only spend their time watching, monkeys pick their butt on YouTube or something? Right. I'm not saying I never watched monkeys picking butts on YouTube or stuff like that. It happens. You get addicted to kind of dumb stuff. But when that's only all that it is, you're falling into that trap where it's unbelievable. Like, people complain about the price of education and whatever, and it's just like, right. You can empower yourself. You can't learn brain surgery online, obviously, but you can get a background in anything you want, before you go to college and you drop, $100,000 in debt to do something that you're not really sure about. You can buy the textbooks online. You can go to forums with people who, like, say you want to learn calculus or something. Like, you can invest a certain amount of that on your own and do it in a way that you go through the process, but you don't go through the indoctrination, or at least you're prepared before you go into that. You're like, you know what? I do need to go to the university to do this or that. That's sort of like the benefit of it, but nobody uses it for that. And then they go to college. They don't really identify who they are or what they're doing very well. They're getting this collective impersonal mindset with a lot of stuff, especially nowadays. And then they're just in a bunch of debt, and then now they're a slave to having to pay that off and do certain things. So we're given gifts with technology, but where is the threshold? Where is the limit where that becomes harmful, or we're falling into the agenda? That's the way I look at it with a lot of this stuff. And this is what astrology, it is interesting. This is a misconception I'll just lay out real quick. Everyone talks about the elites. They worship Saturn and all this stuff. There's Saturn symbolism everywhere. I think it's the exact opposite. Saturn is the construct, and they view that as the creator god, and they believe that they've had restrictions and limitations placed upon them that are unfair, such as, oh, I'm a male in my body, but I really want to be a female. Or, you know what? I want to be a dolphin. Like, whatever. With transhumanism, this alternate reality, you can be anything you want, and this cruel creator who imprisoned you, like Prometheus, to the rock of matter and bound by the zodiac and the Saturn's ring around him at Rockefeller Center, and he's enlightening man against that evil creator. Now maybe there's a reason why we're bound here. You know what I mean? Like, what if we were given gifts and we screwed it up? You hear all these weird stories in like ancient mythology and like Atlantis and whatever, and technology going wrong. I don't know what that really is, but maybe we need to learn the right way to go about things. And maybe the creator wants us to be infinite and do all these awesome things, but it's not going to give it to us just because we think we deserve it. Just because, it's like a kid who's just got their license and they want a Ferrari versus you got to give them an old beater because you don't know what they're going to do with it.
Right.
And it's like the dad who buys them a Ferrari is going to seem awesome and great, but is not really doing anything for the kid. So I wonder if there's something within our psyche and our makeup that they're trying to understand the creation that the creator created, but we have sort of corrupted it in some way, and that's like the garden allegory, I'll put it. I'm not saying there was a real Adam and Eve or anything like that. I'm just saying that, like, maybe there is something to now things are corrupted, and the force that actually corrupted it, they're trying to be God, and they're trying to break free of this quote-unquote Saturnian limitation and construct, and they're pulling out all the stops. There's got to be a reason. Maybe they're on a timeline. Maybe there's some sort of rule set up that they got to offer man immortality. And hey, if you can be God, go for it. Here's your chance. And they're scrambling and they're trying to figure out everything they can. And in turn, we're getting technology. It's the fruits of their labor, but we have the opportunity to use it in the right way. And I think that that's what a lot of the people who see through a lot of this stuff, we're at least on that path of understanding we don't want part of this. And even the people in the Matrix, quote unquote, I think they kind of get it. So all these numbers and numerology and stuff like that, I'm actually kind of stepping away from a lot of numerology. Mm-hmm. I almost look at like the movie Pi. You ever seen that?
Yeah.
The guy drills a hole in his head because he's trying to figure out pi and the mystery of the universe, and it's just like, that's not for any man to know. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of what I've, like, the numerology stuff, I think there's something to it, but there is a way that you can get completely overly invested in that pi, I'm insane realm. And that is what I kind of started to see myself doing. So I pulled myself out of that, and I just like the astrology system in terms of psychology. And I think that that can be used to help people identify things in their life they might not be aware of, or how to, some potential solutions to overcome maybe any issues or any flaws, being mindful of stuff. And I think that that's the way that stuff can be used in a benign way. And I think that, like, for example, you talked about Saturn. Saturn is the vibration of limitation and restriction and kind of karma, reaping and sowing. Mm-hmm. Now, is that bad in and of itself? Like I said, you don't give a 2-year-old a gun. You're going to limit him to that because that's good. That's a limitation or restriction that's good. Versus, trying to just speak your mind to somebody and they zip it up. That's a restriction that's bad, Yeah. And so this is how I view, like, the planets in the zodiac. I believe it's something about it is part of how things function. And the system that we have is a collective analysis of it over the years, and this is what we got so far about how everything works here. And there's something to the cosmos, and they probably know a lot more about it than we do. But I think that we can at least take what our limited knowledge of that is and be way more productive in it than they'll ever be with all of their fancy stuff that's probably hidden in the Vatican vault. Right. Because if you could do it from the place of humility and I'm bettering myself so that I can be a better person to make other people better, versus I'm just bettering myself to make myself look good and thinking I'm making other people better. That's the difference. And so I think that there is something to this Kabbalah. It's not completely like evil, but I feel like there's so many examples of its use by the controlling system, and it's twisted, that I understand why Christians are very wary of all these things. And I agree with, like, astrology can be, I think, very detrimental. It's like, I wouldn't want to check is this a good time to take a crap? Let me check my birth chart and let me look at where the moon is. You know what I mean? Like, that's completely bondage to a bunch of ridiculous stuff. Where, to me, if you understand your birth chart in a way that it gets you more in touch with you and your surroundings. I feel like all that transit stuff that people look at, that will just naturally come into being. You don't need to be overly concerned about where all the planets are at any given time if you're already in tune with your own issues in your chart. And then maybe there are some transit things to look forward and be like, okay, Pluto's going to hit something pretty sensitive. That's a heavy hitter. Mm-hmm. It's mindful to be prepared if some of these themes might start happening, and you can go with it beforehand versus like, oh my God, Pluto's going to hit this, I'm going to die, or you know what I mean? Like there's a healthy way of utilizing it, I think, and right. A completely unhealthy way. And obviously the controlling system is using that a very destructive way, but we have an opportunity to limit what we get with it in a way that is useful and focus on that. And that's kind of like the idea of like real masonry to me. It's like building up the right foundation, not cutting corners, mm-hmm. and doing it with humility and doing it with what you think is right, but always be aware, because we have this dualistic nature to us. You know, am I really doing this for the right reasons? Think about it, really think about it, and be honest with yourself. And I think that that's what's helped me in my life eliminate a lot of my own ego and my arrogance. And, you know, it's easy to read some philosophy books and think you're smart and do all these sorts of things, where it's kind of like, I guess I'll wrap it up on this. It's like the movie Forrest Gump to me. He's the idiot, right? He's just, you know, this simple-minded guy who just doesn't get the complexities of life, or so they say. But he's the best person in that movie. And all the people who are, quote-unquote, smarter and more intelligent are just screwing all their lives up. You know, Jenny is sleeping around, getting beat up by guys, but right. She's just like, you just don't get it, Forrest. You know what I mean? and Lieutenant Dan, you know, like they're all terrible people, but they're smarter than him, seemingly. And I think That's the basis of, like, Dostoevsky's The Idiot, which I really want to read that book because I like Crime and Punishment a lot. And I think that those sorts of teachings, like Crime and Punishment, forgiveness and understanding, and the whole point of Crime and Punishment was the guy thought he was so morally and intellectually superior that he could murder somebody. And that duality, he ended up giving himself away because internally he really didn't feel that. But there was a dark side of him that did. And that's the difference. They don't care. The people who are controlling, they don't really give a crap if they manipulate people to kill each other or anything like that. The ends justifies the means to them. And I think that that's what Crime and Punishment is great in speaking out against. If anybody hasn't read that, I highly recommend it. So that's kind of my synopsis of all of it, and philosophy mixed in with like the construct and how it works and why we're here.
Yeah, right. Well, all right. I mean, I guess we better wrap it up. It's been an hour and a half. It's kind of about as long as I like to go. I could talk to you for hours more. I think, you know, maybe we can do it again in a couple of months. I got a bunch of other stuff on my list that I could have talked about, and we just kind of talked about what we talked about. But, I mean, I really like this work that you've done. It goes so deep, and I think it goes deep into the foundation of, you know, what all this is about. Like, the more that, you know, as like you talk about the truther movement, the more that people that are looking into this stuff, as varied and different as all of our perspectives are, and each of us come at it from, you know, whatever different perspective or different, you know, whatever our different issues may be. Some people are into this, some people are into that. But I think that if we all want to talk about, like you're talking about, what you said about everybody, what we have in common is that everybody kind of feels like something is wrong. And I think that what's wrong is where these people are leading us. Whatever this, you know, it feels like we're being led, you know, whatever this modern science is, whatever direction that it's going in, it seems like it's lacking, even though it poses itself as humanitarian or philanthropic. There's something very cold-hearted about it, and it seems to be leading us towards, as you describe in the series, this transhumanist agenda, which is really, I mean, separating us from our own bodies, you know, figuring out how to upload us into immortal machines. Something that we didn't talk about, I can maybe I'll just kind of conclude my own thoughts about it, is that the ancient Greek concept that really came out for me as I was reading this is this idea of hubris, which is what all the Greek tragedies were all about. When the great warriors started thinking that they were more powerful than the gods. Well, look what happens. They get shafted. Something goes wrong. And I think that's what that's what it feels like to me. It feels like, why do you have to build a nuclear bomb? Why don't we just skip that one? We don't need that. I mean, you also talked just a few minutes ago about the technology. Like, why are they choosing, the technology? What do they have hidden in the Vatican vault? Or what does the Rockefeller Foundation know? Or what did Tesla come up with, that they're not letting us know about? Because we know it's out there. What about the car that drives, that runs on water? I mean, we've heard all these stories, and it's like, why are they making us use fossil fuels and then feeding us all this stuff about global warming? I mean, it's so, it's so bizarre, and it's not making sense, and it seems to be funneling us into this agenda that I don't think the mass of humanity would choose if we were given a choice. And that's just...
Or if at least you really knew what was going on behind it, if you knew that the problems that are created... But people see the solution, but they don't understand the connection to the people providing the solution made the problem. And that's really scary for a lot of people, and I get it. And I'll just conclude one last thing for me. It's just sort of the idea of limitation and Saturn, which is so scary. Look at it in a good way. When you're too overly invested in this conspiracy stuff and you realize that you're becoming like a worse person, that's when you realize you need to restrict something, and that's for me when I was kind of more heavily invested in Christianity. There were elements of that where I started becoming very judgmental, just in my head, like the mindset. You put on that filter of a certain philosophical or spiritual or religious perspective, and you see what comes out of you. Now, some people are just, they want that filter to be right, and I'm not going to give this one up. But when I just have to be honest, like certain things start coming out of me, I'm like, dude, what am I thinking about? Like, I'm being such a jerk right now, just in my head about people. To me, something's wrong there. I don't care what anyone says. And so that's how I look at it. And so, okay, I'm restricting my investment in this, but that opens me up to something else. So it's like healthy borders and limitation and healthy expansion. And that's really a foundation of like a lot of what I incorporate in my own like astrology and what I go through. So that's kind of my wrapping up of it.
All right. Yeah, right on. And I can tell everyone that this is the tip of the iceberg. There is so much that we could talk about. So yeah, I'd love to do it again in a couple months. We'll keep in touch. Do you want to let people know, where they can find your stuff on YouTube, or if you have any kind of website, or maybe I know you're talking about getting your own podcast started anywhere. You want to let people know about any information about getting in touch with you, anything like that?
Sure. Well, I'll provide you some links. You can put them in the description, but my YouTube is Schism206. And I just started a Steemit account. And that's in the infant stages. But if anybody's on that, a lot of people aren't really aware about it. But you can follow me on there. And I'd have a new podcast, the Proud to be Profane podcast. Since we're all profane according to these occultists. I do have a few episodes up on there already. And actually, I'd love to have you on at some point to return the favor.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
And so I have a few there, and you can find that on the YouTube channel. And I have a couple videos giving other links if people want to listen to it somewhere else, Mixcloud, iTunes, or whatever. So I'll give you all of that for the show notes.
All right. Perfect. And I'll just remind everyone, too, if they like what they're hearing, then please think about becoming a patron of the show, patreon.com/The Shift. You can check us out on Facebook at The Shift with Doug McKenty, on Twitter at DMcKenty, and the website for The Shift is www.theshiftnow.com. And thanks again for being on the show. I'm looking forward to seeing where you go with all of this, and we'll talk again sometime in the future.
All right. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Michael. Take care.